The story begins with an ending. It is October 3rd, 1849, in Baltimore, Maryland. The city is shrouded in fog and the violence of Election Day. Outside a rough tavern known as Gunner's Hall, a man lies in the gutter. He is semi-conscious, delirious, and unable to move. A passerby named Joseph Walker spots him. At first glance, it's just another drunkard in a city full of them. But as Walker leans closer, he recoils. He recognizes the face. It is the face of America's most famous literary genius, Edgar Allan Poe. But the horror is in the details. Poe is not wearing his own clothes. He is a man known for his gentlemanly black wool suits, yet here he is dressed in a cheap, stained alpaca coat, baggy trousers that don't fit, and a battered straw hat. His dignity is gone. He has been missing for 5 days. Where has he been? And why is he wearing a stranger's clothes? Walker rushes him to Washington Medical College, where Poe is locked in a tower room reserved for the insane. He never regains his sanity. For 4 days, he lives in a waking nightmare, hallucinating and trembling. On his final night, he doesn't call for family. He screams a single name over and over. Reynolds. Reynolds. To this day, historians do not know who Reynolds was. A creditor? A secret lover? A phantom of his broken mind? On the morning of October 7th, the screaming stops. Poe whispers, "Lord help my poor soul," and dies. Official cause of death, congestion of the brain. But the theories are far darker. Is he a victim of cooping, a brutal election fraud, where gangs kidnapped victims, drugged them, and forced them to vote multiple times in different disguises? Was it a suicide? Was it the final result of a life spent chasing the darkness? To understand his death, we must look at the curse of his life. Edgar was born in 1809 to traveling actors. His father abandoned the family, and his mother Eliza died of tuberculosis when Edgar was just 2. This was the primal wound. He watched his beautiful mother waste away, her skin turning marble white, blood staining her lips when she coughed. This image, the death of a beautiful woman, would become the obsession of his art. It became the Red Death. Orphaned, he was taken in by the wealthy Allan family in Virginia, but he was never adopted. Grew up in a limbo of luxury and insecurity. His foster father, John Allan, was a cold, practical merchant who despised Edgar's artistic temperament. He constantly reminded the boy that he was a charity case, the son of lowly actors. By the time Poe reached the University of Virginia, he was desperate to prove himself. But John Allan sent him there with no money. Freezing and starving, Edgar turned to gambling to survive and lost everything. He began to drink not for fun, but for oblivion. He discovered that alcohol turned him into a madman almost instantly. Crushed by debt and rejected by his foster father, Poe fled. He had lost his family, his inheritance, and his social standing. He was 18, brilliant and utterly alone. He looked at the respectable world that had rejected him and decided to burn the bridge. He would not be a merchant or a gentleman. He would walk into the darkness. Edgar Allan Poe made a decision that was in the 1830s, a form of financial suicide. He decided to become a professional writer. In an era without copyright laws, where magazines paid pennies, this was a guarantee of poverty. But Poe had no choice. The imp of the perverse, the urge to do the wrong thing simply because it is wrong, was driving him. He moved to Baltimore to live with his aunt, Maria Clem, and her young daughter, Virginia. In this cramped, poverty-stricken house, he found the only thing he had ever truly wanted, a home. And he found Virginia. In 1835, Poe married Virginia Clem. He was 26, she was 13. To modern eyes, this is disturbing. Even then, it was unusual. But Virginia was his sissy, his muse, the one pure thing in a corrupt world. He worshipped her. With Virginia as his anchor, Poe's genius exploded. He invented the modern detective story with the murders in the Rue Morgue, creating the blueprint for Sherlock Holmes. He wrote brutal reviews, earning the nickname the Tomahawk, making enemies of the literary elite. He worked like a man possessed, trying to write his way out of starvation. Then, in 1845, he published The Raven. It was a phenomenon. The poem about a grieving lover and a talking bird captured the imagination of the world. It was dark, rhythmic, and hypnotic. Poe became an overnight celebrity. But the tragedy of Poe is that fame did not bring fortune. He was paid only $9 for the Raven. He was the most famous man in America, yet he couldn't afford to heat his home. And then the nightmare returned. One evening while singing, Virginia coughed. A stream of bright red blood ran down her dress. It was the exact same image Poe had seen with his mother 30 years before. The consumption had returned. The Red Death had come for his bride. The next 5 years were a slow torture. Virginia would recover, giving him hope, only to crash again. Poe's mind began to fracture. He couldn't bear the pain of watching her die, so he drank. He disappeared for days. He wrote The Black Cat and The Telltale Heart during this time, stories about guilt, madness, and the terror of the beating heart. He was writing his own autobiography in the guise of horror. They were so poor that witnesses described Virginia lying on a straw mattress, wrapped in Poe's old military coat, with a cat sleeping on her chest for warmth. On January 30th, 1847, she died. She was 24, the same age as his mother. When she died, the last thread holding Edgar Allan Poe to reality snapped. He would visit her grave in the dead of winter, sitting in the snow, wishing for the cold to take him too. He had looked into the abyss for so long, and now the abyss was staring back. After Virginia's death, Poe became a ship without a rudder, drifting toward a whirlpool. The final 2 years of his life were a blur of frantic behavior and desperation. He was terrified of being alone. He tried to find a replacement for Virginia, proposing to different women, clutching at their dresses, begging for salvation. He engaged in a romance with the poet Sarah Helen Whitman, who agreed to marry him only if he stayed sober. He tried, but the demons were too strong. He broke his vow, and she left him. He eventually reconnected with his childhood sweetheart, Sarah Elmira Royster, now a wealthy widow in Richmond. It seemed, for a brief moment, that he might be saved. They became engaged. He joined a temperance society. He looked healthy. He prepared to leave Richmond for a quick business trip to Philadelphia and New York, promising to return to marry her. Ordered a boat in late September 1849. He had money in his pocket and a cane that concealed a sort of sign of his growing paranoia. He never made it to New York. He vanished into thin air. The 5 lost days of Edgar Allan Poe are a black hole in history. When he reappeared outside Gunner's Hall in Baltimore, wearing another man's soiled clothes, he was already too far gone. In his final moments in the hospital, Dr. Moran asked him if he wanted to see any friends. Poe replied with a line that could have ended one of his stories. "My best friend would be the man who would take a pistol and blow out my brains." He died on October 7th. Only 4 people attended his funeral. He was buried in a cheap pine coffin in an unmarked grave.
Ow.
But his enemies made a mistake. A rival named Rufus Griswold wrote a biography immediately after Poe's death, painting him as a drug-addicted, depraved lunatic, hoping to ruin his reputation. Instead, Griswold created a legend. The public didn't want a saint. They wanted the dark, tortured genius. They wanted the man who lived the horror, he wrote. Edgar Allan Poe changed the world because he was the first to admit that we are all afraid. He didn't write about monsters under the bed. He wrote about the monster inside our own heads, the guilt, the perversity, the grief that refuses to die. He invented the detective story, the psychological thriller, and science fiction. But his greatest story was his own life, a tragedy of love and loss that ended in a gutter in Baltimore. The mystery of his death, the clothes, the name Reynolds, the lost days remains unsolved, and perhaps that is fitting. The man who dedicated his life to the mystery left us with one final puzzle that can never be solved.